Hey there, Pro Church Media community, this is Jason again. In this tutorial, we're going to get back into After Effects and take a look at how to create this fun, glitchy motion graphics project using only a few animated shapes and a whole bunch of effects, but no third-party plugins, no third-party effects, no third-party anything. Everything from scratch within After Effects itself, and it's really actually pretty easy and quite a lot of fun to make, and you can really create some interesting glitch effects without having to buy any special plugins or anything like that. So everything inside of After Effects, I think it's be awesome. You can create some really great looks, so let's get right into it. Alright, so I know I said we're not going to be using any third-party plugins, and we're not, but I did want to make you aware of some because they can make a lot of this stuff a whole lot easier if you have the budget for it or things like that. So the first one is called Red Giant Universe. You can get it from redgiant.com, and it really has a bunch of effects, not just glitch, but there's tons of awesome effects within Red Giant Universe, so be sure to check that out. The next one is called the TV Distortion Bundle from Robyte Software, which you can find at aescripts.com, and it's actually quite a bit cheaper now. It used to be like over $200, but now you can get the whole bundle for $100. And there's Data Glitch, Bad TV, TV Pixel, Dot Pixels, Separate, RGB. And so just a lot of great glitch effects that you can pretty easily apply to just about anything inside of After Effects. The next one is kind of an older one from Video Copilot called Twitch, but it still works really nicely and you can create some great effects with Twitch. I like to use it personally for like transitions and things like that. It works really nicely for that, so be sure to check out Twitch. And then there's a free one that you can get from Rocket Stock called the Digital Distortion Template. This one's pretty render intensive, but it is free, and so you might as well download it and check it out because it creates some really cool glitch effects and you can really dial in the settings, and so be sure to check that out. Okay, but enough about that. We're going to create some homegrown glitch inside of After Effects, and that may be the first time anyone has ever said homegrown glitch inside of a tutorial, so I guess we're breaking new ground here. Anyway, so let's start off with a new composition, command down on the keyboard, and I think I'm just going to make it, let's say 1500 by 1500 pixels, and we'll go 30 frames a second. I think we'll do a duration of 10 seconds. Okay, so I think I'm just going to call this build _2 just because I already have a previous build, and I'm going to be referencing my previous versions just because there's a lot of different effects and it's hard to keep track of which ones there are, and just to kind of help us build this out. So this is actually only a few shapes that are animating, as you can see. Let me go ahead and turn all these effects off for right now, and I'll just leave these shape layers on. So you can see it's just these boxes with a stroke. They're just kind of animating like that, and so it's pretty simple. Nothing too complicated. It's really all the effects that make this kind of cool. So let's start off just by creating these boxes. So I'm going to go over here and just grab my rectangle tool. You can use Q on your keyboard to access that if you want to, and I'm going to give it a stroke. You can make it whatever color you want. I'm going to do kind of a vibrant blue here, make sure it doesn't have a fill. And then just click and drag while holding shift to constrain the proportions. Just make a perfect square like that. And then I'm going to come over to my align tools and just line it up in the center. Okay, so now what I want to do is create a thicker stroke here. I think something like 62 or so will work pretty well. And I want to twirl down on my layer here, and then on the contents, go to the rectangle, go to the stroke, just make sure this is 62 and that'll be great. And I think what I want to happen, if I go back to my previous version here, let's find one that starts here. So you can see the stroke actually, for the most part, stays the same width the entire time except right here at the very beginning. And so instead of actually animating the scale of the layer, we're going to animate the size of the box or the path here. And so when you animate just the size of the path, it maintains that stroke width. And so if you're ever wanting to keep your strokes the same width on a shape, just be sure to animate the size of the shape rather than the actual layer itself. Okay, so let's come out to about, I think with these previous ones I had the animation, let's see, last about 5 seconds. And so I'm just going to come out to 5 seconds and add a keyframe here for the size, and I'll just have the size go quite a bit beyond the bounding of my canvas. And then we'll come back here and then just put the size down at 0. All right, so if we leave the stroke width at 62, you can see we're gonna have a problem when it just kind of pops on like that. And so I think what we'll do is maybe for like the first 6 frames or so, we'll animate that stroke width. So I'm just going to add a keyframe here and then come back to the beginning and just stick this down to 0. And now it should not just pop on, it should, you know, kind of feel more like it's growing. We could even pull this out a little bit more if you don't want it to be so dramatic. And I think that looks pretty good, so I think we'll go with that. Okay, so now that we have that done, what I'm gonna do is just add a marker here at 1 second. So I'm gonna do Control 8 on my keyboard just to add that marker there. And I can probably close up these keyframes here just by hitting U on the keyboard. And now I'm going to duplicate this with Command D and then just pull my next one right to that marker. And so these are going to help me space these out because I want them to be pretty symmetrical because we're going to be making this loop. And so I think that'll be okay. And just duplicate it one more time with Command D, pull this over one more time. Just like that. Okay. So now we have these these scaling boxes. Actually, maybe we should add some rotation. So let's just delete these and we'll come back here and pull up the rotation with R. And then I'm gonna hit U to pull up all the keyframes. And so I think probably when it gets to about here, you know, we could maybe have it rotate to about right there. Let's come back to the beginning, have it start, you know, maybe plus 15, something like that. You can really do whatever you want. I think that'll probably work pretty well. Maybe we even go a little bit more. So let's maybe start like plus 20, and then we'll go to maybe minus 20. All right, now let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's a pretty nice rotation. Okay, so now we'll just duplicate this, Command D, pull it over, duplicate one more time, Command D, pull it over. And this middle one, I think I'm gonna make this more of a vibrant pink. So we'll just choose something like that. We can always change these colors later if we want to. Okay, so let's close up all the keyframes by hitting U until they're closed up. We'll just play this back. And I think I like that. Looks pretty good. Okay, so now I'm going to select all of these, duplicate them all with Command D, and then pull them up to the top here. And I want there to be just a little bit of space in between here. So I think what I did here is I maybe, you know, had it wait like, looks like 2 seconds or so, or maybe it's 3 seconds. Okay. So what we'll do is come back here, and so this one starts at 2, so we'll have these ones all start at 5, just so like as that one's leaving, then that one's starting, something like that. Now we'll grab all these, and we can pull, you know, this back over here, something like that. We'll duplicate all of these, Command D, pull this up here, and we'll go, you know, once again to I guess 6 or whatever. And we'll see if that gives us our loop. It didn't. I think I went 1 too far. So let's pull that over. That should work. Yeah, so now we're getting that loop. So I think that'll work pretty well. And we can of course change this up if we want to, but I think I'm liking that pretty well. Yeah, because I do want a little bit of space just so it's not constantly like that. We could of course make it constant if we wanted to, but I think in this case, we'll just leave it like this. Okay, so now we basically have all of our shapes animated, and so we're pretty good to go with that. I'm gonna go ahead and pre-comp all of these just to kind of clean things up. So right click, go to pre-compose, and then just call this shapes. Okay, so now we're pretty much done with our animation. Now it's really just adding a whole bunch of effects to make this more interesting. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to turn off the transparency just so I can have that black. And now I'm going to just kind of go back over here to reference what I did. So we're going to start with just some turbulence to add to this. Okay, so this turbulence is just going to help kind of muddy up the sides of the shapes and things like that. And so I'm just going to use a turbulent displace, and you can use whatever values you want, whatever you think looks good, but I'll probably do something pretty close to this. And so let's come over here, create a new adjustment layer, Command Alt Y. Be sure to memorize this shortcut because we're going to be using it a lot. And I'm just going to call this turbulent displace. It's really important to label these adjustment layers because we're going to be using quite a few of them. Okay, so now we'll go up to Effect, and then scroll down to Distort, and then go down to Turbulent Displace. And I think we did something like 11 and 42. Let's just kind of see what we got here. And you can see it's creating a little bit of waviness here. And so as this as these scale up, it just kind of has a little bit of waviness going on, which is kind of cool. All right, so maybe we can pull up the complexity just to even get more kind of distortion on those edges. And I think, yeah, it looks pretty close to what we did before. You could even, adjust the offset if you wanted to, but you could even do the evolution. I think I might have, there's no animation on this. So we'll just leave this effect as it is. I kind of like that. And once we get all the other effects stacked on top of it, it's really going to help make this look cool. Okay, so next we're going to do just a cross blur, which is helping to get some of this kind of blurriness going on here. And so I'm going to create another adjustment layer, Command-Alt-Y, and call this cross blur. Now let's go up to Effect, down to Blur and Sharpen, then choose cross blur here. And we're just going to really crank this up to like 350 and 350, something like that. And so I think also maybe we'll set this to add and probably turn the opacity down. A lot of times you're going to be adjusting these things as you go and making adjustments as you're going along. I don't want to belabor this video, so I'll just try to recreate this as best as possible. Set this to add just so it's kind of going to be blowing this out a little bit. Right now we're not seeing much just because there's not a whole lot else in there. But once we get a lot of other effects stacked on top of this, we're really going to start to see this add up. Okay, so once again, let's create another adjustment layer, Command-Alt-Y. And this one, we're going to be doing a vector blur. And so let's call this vector blur. And then go up to Effect, go down to Blur and Sharpen, then choose CC Vector Blur. This is one of those effects that's really easy to go overboard with, but you can really create some cool stuff with it with some unexpected results sometime. And so for this one, I basically cranked the amount all the way up. I just warned against overdoing it. I pretty much overdid it. But for this effect, I think it'll work pretty well. And so we're gonna, basically kind of recreate this. So like 500, 100, and 14.7 or something like that. So we'll just crank it up. You can kind of see we're getting some interesting effects going on here. But as we start to adjust this, you can see it's kind of softening those edges a little bit and kind of shrinking it a little bit too. And so it's kind of, taking some of the harshness of that distortion off there. So that's kind of interesting. And then for this, I think I'm also going to, maybe add an expression to this angle offset. And so over here, what I did was I just added a quick wiggle to it. And so let's just add a wiggle to this. So Alt-click on the stopwatch. And let's do something like wiggle and then a parentheses. And then you can say something like, let's do 6 and then 15. So the first number is the frequency, the second number is the amplitude. And so it's going to be, 6 times a second for, 15 degrees, somewhere in between the values that are there. So we're probably not going to see this too much, but it's really going to affect things once we get some other glows and things like that going on. All right, so next we're going to be doing an emboss, and this is a really fun effect that I like to use sometimes just to give an interesting look to things. So once again, another adjustment layer, Command-Alt-Y. We'll call this Color Emboss. So you can see what this will do when we go to Effect, Stylize, and then go down to Color Emboss. And as you start to pull out the relief, you can see we're starting to get some interesting effects going on here. By itself, it doesn't look that great, but when you add it with other things, it can really start to be interesting. We can have different amounts of contrast, we're kind of starting to get some glitchiness going on there, depending on what you want to do, but I think we'll just do something like that. All right, next we're going to move on to adding some fractal noise to this, and this is going to help add in some of these little glitches here that you see around. I mean, this is also a pretty subtle effect. It's also creating some of these, I don't know if you can see these lines going through here. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to just kind of copy this just so you can kind of see what happens here. So for this one, we're going to create a new solid, so Command-Y, and we'll call this fractal. And I'm just going to paste this on here, and you can kind of see what's happening here. So I'm using a basic fractal type, and I'm using block, and then what I did to kind of get these long lines going on here is I really cranked up the contrast, and you can see kind of what's happening there. And then I brought down, I adjusted the brightness to kind of get a good balance between the streaks and the amount of whiteness. And then for the transform, this is really where it gets crucial, is, unlocking the scaling and then just cranking up the width. Because if you just have this at like 100 and 100, you just get something like that, which is interesting enough. But when you just kind of really crank it out, you start to get this kind of interesting look going on here, especially as you adjust the height as well. And so you can get some interesting streak glitches going on here. And then I just set this to stencil luma. And so what this is going to do is once I do stencil luma, you can see it's only, applying this to where there's actually some pixel information. So only on these boxes as they're animated. So as we kind of play this back, you can kind of see what's happening here. We're getting this nice little glitch effect here. And in the fractal noise itself, I added a time expression to this random seed. So let me go ahead and walk through this real quick. Okay, so I'll take that off. And so you can find this under evolution options, random seed. And so what you want to do is just hit alternate, click on that stopwatch. And now you can just add a quick little expression to do time and then times. And I'm just going to do 8. And so now it's basically going to change up this random seed, 8 at a rate of 8, whatever that means in respect to this composition. And so that's kind of what's animating that kind of wave glitch effect there, is because every time this value is rendered, it's going to shift up how this looks and how it's calculated. And so that's given us the nice animation there. Yeah, so that's looking pretty fun. Okay, so let's move on. Next, we're going to do a quick little mosaic. And so this is basically kind of just a pixelization effect. Command-Alt-Y to bring up the adjustment layer. We'll call this mosaic. You could also say pixelate, whichever you want to do. Let's go up to Effect, scroll down to Stylize, and then do Mosaic. And so as you kind of scrub through, you can see we're getting this interesting mosaic effect. I think I'm going to do 30 by 30. And so we'll get something like that. It doesn't look great, but really what I want to do is grab my shape tool, pull up the ellipse. And I'm just going to draw a mask on this, so make sure this is selected. Hold shift while you're drawing this to make a perfect circle. And then I'm just going to kind of bring it here into the center. Now I want to invert this mask and then go down to hit double M to pull up all the mask properties. And then I'm really going to crank up the feather, maybe something like 300 or so. And then really increase the expansion. I really want this effect just to kind of hit those edges. And so you can kind of see we're getting that pixelization effect around the edges of the frame, but not here in the middle. And so it's just going to be pretty subtle, but it's just going to kind of affect this as it leaves the composition. And so I think that's kind of cool looking. So we'll go with that. All right, next we're going to add an optics compensation. This is just going to give us a little bit of a fisheye effect. So once again, Command-Alt-Y, I'm just going to call this optics. Now let's go up to Effect, Distort, and go down to Optics Compensation. Move forward just so you can see what's going on here. And then I'm going to click Reverse Lens Distortion and just start cranking this up. I want it to be pretty subtle. So it's going to kind of bend it a little bit. You can go really crazy if you want to, but I just want it to be pretty subtle, something like that, just to kind of give a little bit more distortion going on, like the edges of the frame are kind of, ruining the image or something like that. Okay, moving on, we're going to add a digital glitch to this. And so this is actually a built-in effect that's kind of newer with After Effects CC 2019. It might have been in 2018, but I do know it's in 2019. So we're going to do Command-Alt-Y to bring up that adjustment layer, call this digital glitch. And then you want to go up to Effect, scroll down to Immersive Video, and then choose VR Digital Glitch. Now with this, you have to make sure that your project setting is set to use the GPU acceleration. If you get an error that it's not, just go up to File and then down to Project Settings. And then for right here, you just want to make sure it uses whatever your GPU acceleration is. If you don't have that, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to use this, but you can use whatever GPU acceleration you have if you do in fact have that. All right, so let's move forward a little bit, and you can see we're getting some interesting glitch effects here. Let's see what I did over here. I might just go ahead and copy this and just kind of paste it in there. And so you can see I kind of changed the horizontal field of view. You can see what happens as you mess with those settings, what happens when you mess with those. I just want these little subtle glitches going on here. And then I added a random seed expression. So I just, let me pull that up, double E on your keyboard to bring up those expressions. So once again, I added that time expression to the random seed like we did with the fractal noise. Then I also added some wiggles to the point of interest and the translate X. And so that's basically just wiggling where this is happening. You can see that little 3D point right there. It's just kind of moving around over time. And so it's just kind of messing with the position of these glitches just to kind of animate them a little bit. And so you can see the effect that we're getting. So it's pretty cool. It's kind of subtle, but I think it adds just a little bit of texture and visual interest to the entire piece. All right, so next we're going to do one called chromatic aberrations. This is another VR one, so I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that again. New adjustment layer, Command-Alt-Y. We'll call this chroma or whatever you want to call it. And this is effect, immersive video, VR chromatic aberrations. And so you can see we're getting those nice chromatic aberrations going on there. It's basically splitting up the RGB channels, and so you can get some interesting looks with that. And so you can just kind of mess with this however you want to, add different looks, and you can of course animate these over time if you want to. I believe for this, let me go ahead and paste that in there. I just animated the point of interest once again so you can see that little point right there. And it's just kind of adjusting where the chromatic aberration happens from, just to give a little bit of variation over time. All right, so I think we're getting a pretty sweet look going on here, even though we haven't finished this yet, but we still have some more effects to add to this. And so let's look at what we got next. Next is called VR Glow, and so I'm going to add another adjustment layer, Command-Alt-Y, call this VR Glow. And once again, we're going to be using that immersive video effect list and just go to VR Glow. And so this one, once you start adjusting the threshold down, you can see we're starting to get some glow off of those layers. You can also adjust the brightness and all that kind of stuff. I might just copy and paste what I did here just to kind of try to recreate this as much as possible. But you can, of course, do whatever look works the best for your particular situation. Okay, so we're almost done within our pre-comp here. I do want to add this noise layer here. And so I'm just going to do one more adjustment layer, Command-Alt-Y, and we'll call this noise. And then we'll go up to Effect, scroll down to Noise and Grain, and then choose Noise. And I really want to crank this up just to get a lot of that digital noise going on there. We can use color noise or not. I think I do like the color noise. It might be kind of hard to see, but once we get some other things going on here, we might see a little bit better. And you can kind of see we're getting a pretty interesting look going on here with all these effects stacked on top of each other. And you can of course reorder these to get even different looks. Just kind of depends on what you're going for. It's experimentation is really the name of the game. So this is really the fun part where you can just kind of play around with stuff, see what works, see what doesn't, see what you like, and it's just a lot of fun to play around with. All right, I think that's pretty much it for all the effects. There is one more thing we have going on in here. And so you might notice there's kind of, you remember if you've ever watched a VHS, how they used to have the kind of, it's not really a scan line, but it's more of where the playhead kind of distorted and, kind of glitched everything on the way down and stuff like that. So I just have something like that going on here. It's actually pretty easy to pull off, and it's kind of fun to do too. So let me just give you a quick rundown of how to make something like this. Okay, so let's create just a quick rectangle. Grab your rectangle tool. You can do that with Q. And then make sure you don't have anything selected. Just pull it all the way across. Doesn't matter how far it goes as long as it fills the entire screen. We don't want a stroke for this, so we'll take off the stroke. We can put a fill on here. Does not matter what color it is. And you can scale it up or down as you need to. I think that'll work pretty well. And I'm just going to call this mask. And then I also want to create a new null that's going to control this, and you'll see why here in just a second. So we'll do Command-Alt-Shift-Y to create a new null. And then I'm just going to call this control, and then parent the mask to that control. And so now that control layer is going to move that rectangle up and down. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to basically have this always moving down, but I want to be able to add a wiggle effect to the Y position of this without having to do a whole bunch of keyframing and stuff like that. And so I'm going to cheat just a little bit. And so let's start with this all the way up here so it's off the frame, and then pull up P to add a position keyframe. And then let's just move forward, say 3 seconds or so. And then we'll pull it all the way down so it leaves the frame. And it can be a constant speed since we don't see the start of it or the end of it. That'll be great. All right, so now what we want to do is pull up the position of this mask. So hit P, and then right click on this position property and choose separate dimensions. All right, so now for Y position, we just need to add a wiggle effect to this. I'm just going to alt click on that stopwatch. We'll do wiggle, parentheses, 3, and then, let's just do 800 just because, and then we'll see what that looks like. So now what's going to happen, we might need to compensate by moving this up just a little bit to start with. So now as this is constantly moving down, that's going to be wiggling, and so it kind of gives that, distorted look as it's moving, but it's still moving down. We don't have to do a whole bunch of keyframing to get that. It'll eventually reach the bottom, and we might need to compensate just by moving this down. We could also bring down how far this goes. Maybe we'll only do 500, then we don't have to worry about it so much. Something like that, and then we could pull this back up just a little bit. Yeah, something like that. Okay. Now we need to add a transform effect. So let's make one more adjustment layer, Command-Alt-Y. Call this transform. And let's go ahead and put that below the mask. And let's just get to where we can see the mask somewhere, like right there. Okay, so now let's go up to Effect and then choose Distort and choose Transform. All right, we need to make this to use the mask as a track matte. So just come over to this track matte. If you don't have this, just make sure that your switches are turned on over here. And then let's just choose Alpha Matte Mask. So now we can play with the scale. Let's go ahead and take off Uniform Scale, and we'll just really scale up the height. And if you go too far, you're going to get an error. And so let's just pull this back down to like 200. As long as we're kind of getting that distortion going on there, I think we'll be okay. Because it's just it's actually meant to kind of look like what's behind there. We just want it to be, distorted a little bit. We could even probably pull it up to like 500, it'll be fine. I'll just change the scale height to 1000. We'll see if this works. Looks like we're okay. So now as we play this back, you can see we're getting that nice kind of distortion going on there, which is interesting. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a fun look going on there. So I think I kind of like that, and so we can kind of move forward with that. As we come to 3 seconds, we'll go ahead and select all of these, Command-Shift-D to split those, and we'll just delete that. I'm going to select all of these and just make them the same color just to kind of keep them organized. And once they're all selected, I'm going to do Command-D to duplicate those. Bring them up above there, move them to about, somewhere right about there so it, starts again. And then we're getting that same kind of distortion going on. We might be missing where we want to be, but I think that'll be okay. And then we can do the same thing over here, Command-D to duplicate those, just pull them up above there, somewhere to the end right around over there. Something like that'll work pretty well. And so we're getting that nice kind of playhead distortion effect going on. And so I think we're pretty much done inside of this build. You can see it's not quite like this one, but that's okay. You can do all kinds of different looks if you want to. It's just kind of depending on what you want to do with it. And we could, of course, come back in here and play with any of these other things if we wanted to. Maybe we could pull up our cross blur. That's probably way too much. Things like that. Whatever you want to play around with. It's really up to you and your creativity. Okay, so now we're ready to finish this out. Let's create a new composition, Command-N on your keyboard. Once again, we'll make it 1500 by 1500, 10 seconds long. I'm just going to call this box glitch _2, hit OK. Now we'll pull that build 2 into there, and so we can start playing this back and see we're getting everything from our pre-comp in there, which is great. Okay, so in my original one, what I did is I started off just by doing a separating the channels on a couple duplicates of this. So let's go ahead and duplicate this, and then we'll go up to Effect, and then Channel, and then Set Channels. And for this one, I want to keep the source red at red, but I want to turn these ones off. So I'm just going to turn the green off, turn the blue off. And so now we're just getting that red channel going on here. And now I just need to set it to lighten. And so now it's going to kind of bleed through. And I'm just going to tap it over just a little bit, just to kind of get that chromatic aberration split RGB look going on here. I'm going to duplicate this one more time. And for the red, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to come down to the blue and set it to blue. And so now we get the blue channel. We can, scoot this over off to the side over there to get more chromatic aberration. That's kind of fun. And so we can play that back. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add a posterize to it. This is going to just kind of posterize the time so it almost feels more jittery and almost stop motiony. So Command-Alt-Y, we'll call this posterize. And let's go up to Effect, Time, and then choose Posterize Time. We'll set this to about 12 or 15, just kind of depends on what you want. And we can start playing this back, and you can kind of see, we're not getting that completely smooth look anymore. It's a lot more stuttery, and so that's actually kind of interesting. I might do 15 just because this is 30 frames a second. Just kind of depends on what you want to go with, but I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so next we're going to do a quick little gradient ramp here. And so once again, Command-Alt-Y, and I'm going to call this gradient. Let's go up to Effect, and then Generate Gradient Ramp. And I want to just kind of warm this up just a little bit. It's going to default to black and white, so I'm going to grab, maybe kind of an orangey red. And then either a darker or lighter kind of yellow or orange in the same kind of hue or whatever, and then pull these points over just to kind of make it a little bit more diagonal. And then I think maybe I'll set this to multiply just to warm it up. And that's, I don't know if that's doing what I want exactly, but it's kind of an interesting look. You can play around with it until you get what you want, but I might just pull the opacity down quite a bit just because I want it to be a pretty subtle warming up, just something like that. All right, so lastly, let's go ahead and add a curves adjustment. And with this one, it really just depends on the feel of it that you want, but it's a great way to really change up the colors and things like that. So go up to Effect, and then Color Correction, and then Curves. And I'm just gonna increase the contrast here in the darks, maybe pull up the brights a little bit, maybe crush those blacks just a little bit, just because it's kind of a more vintagey effect going on here. And I think we also probably need to add a black background, because right now we're still with a transparent background. I think that's going to help some of these effects out. So I'm just going to grab my rectangle tool. You can use Q to grab that, and then just draw a rectangle. And let's put it here in the back, and then we'll add just pure black. And so yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. I probably crushed the blacks way too much for that, so I'm just going to pull those back down, something like that. And I think that's looking kind of nice and vintagey. Kind of cool. Okay, so for the reds, I think I might just pull these up a little bit, just kind of blow out the reds there in the highlight, maybe kind of punch them over there. Could, mess with actually kind of like that red cast if we pull up the shadows. And then let's go to the greens, and we can mess around with this. You can add some more, cyans to it, or you can add a little more yellow up in the highlights, but I think, maybe right where it is. Let's grab the blues. You can warm it up by pulling the shadows down, or kind of cool it off by bringing those shadows up there. I think I want to warm it up just a little bit. Let's see what happens here in the highlights. Something like that's pretty good. We could maybe add a little bit of a blue cast just by pulling up the shadows there. And you can also mess around with the alpha if you want to, just to kind of, that's probably actually not going to do anything for this, so that's okay. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty nice. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. You can see it's not exactly like this one, but that's perfectly okay. And the great thing is of course, all of this is non-destructive. So I can just go into my previous pre-comp, and let's say I don't like these colors. I could just go into my shapes, and I could grab all these blue ones here. I think these are the blue ones. It actually might be interesting to have the blue, but I'll just kind of leave it as it is. You could also add a quick adjustment layer here, and just do kind of a color correction, do a hue saturation, and I could always just highlight the cyans and then just change this to that orange, and so that's an even easier way to do it. So sometimes, you can find interesting ways to kind of get around those types of things. And so that's kind of interesting looking. So we can go back to our box glitch tool, and you can see how this really changes up how this looks. And I actually kind of like the orange and the pink. I think it gives it a nice, interesting look. I might turn that gradient off. Actually, I kind of like it without the gradient because we have those kind of purples going on there, which is interesting. And so yeah, we got an interesting look going on here. And you can of course change up the curves to mess around with how this looks. Maybe you want to pull down the reds. That looks terrible, but all kinds of stuff you can do with it. So now we can just preview this and see what it looks like. All right, let's take a little quick look at what this looks like. And I really like this. I think it's looking pretty awesome. So yeah, I like it. There's one more thing I think we could do with this just to kind of, make it unnecessarily glitchy. So in my previous one, I had these little glitch boxes going on here. So this is actually pretty easy to pull off. What I'm going to do is just grab a little rectangle, my rectangle tool, and just kind of draw this quick little rectangle right here. And I don't want the strokes, I'll just turn that off. Doesn't matter what color it is. I might change it to white just so I can see it. All right, so now what I'm going to do is go into my rectangle and then twirl that down, go to the transform, and alt-click on the position. I'm just going to add a wiggle effect to this, so wiggle, and then let's do something like 8, and then something like 310, I don't know. And so this is going to, basically move this all around, stuff like that. And then just add a posterize effect to this. This is actually going to be an easier way to do it. So never mind the complicated expressions. We're just going to cheat just by adding the posterize time. Let's set it to like 8. And so now we're going to get almost exactly the same effect. We could make it faster if we wanted to. Let's see what that looks like. No, that's fine. Okay, so now what I can do is, since this is randomizing it, all I can do is Command D to duplicate it. You can see it's automatically going to position it differently. So now I can just keep hitting Command D, and it's going to keep positioning it differently based on the amount of wiggle that I have going on. If I want to move these somewhere else, I can grab this one, go into the path, just change the position here. If I try to change the position of this, of this rectangle, it's not going to actually move just because I guess it will. There we go. So I'll just move that, and now I can just keep duplicating it and add some more in there. Once again with this one, I'll just pull it up over here, duplicate it a few times with Command D, pull it over here, Command D to duplicate, maybe right here in the middle, Command D to duplicate. Okay, so now we have all the rectangles here, so let's call this rectangles. And we're going to do that same transform effect here. So I'm going to pull this down over here, and then once again, I'm going to do a adjustment layer, Command Alt Y. Call it transform, and pull this down, and then I'm going to use a track matte with that rectangle, so just add an alpha matte. And now what I want to do is add that transform effect, so effect, distort, and then transform. And maybe I will scale it up a little bit. You can see we're starting to get that glitch effect going on there. Maybe I'll change the skew axis, skew it a little bit. I could change the rotation just to kind of, make it not look like anything over there. I could change up the anchor point, all kinds of stuff, maybe scale it up some more. It doesn't really matter because it's going to be very fast and very glitchy. And so now as we play this back, you can see we're going to be getting this kind of interesting glitch pattern going on here. And so it kind of almost simulates digital distortion or data glitch or something like that. So now if we go back here, you can see that's really adding some interesting effects here. And so we can play this back and see what it looks like. So there we go. We have our glitchy motion graphics project. Very minimal animation, very minimal expressions, but still a really cool look, all made inside of After Effects. Some real good homegrown glitch. And so hope this tutorial is helpful for you. Get out there, make some cool glitch effects inside of After Effects. Can't wait to see what you make with this. Have a lot of fun, and I will talk to you later. If you like this tutorial, be sure to visit ProChurchMediaUniversity.com, where you can find full courses, workshops, training, and more. ProChurchMediaUniversity.com.